Welcome to Monday Monologues, the bi-weekly podcast that is here to break down themes, tropes, and literary aspects for you to use in your story. This week, we will be looking at how to include conflict within your story with examples from the Odyssey. On Episode 1, The Violence Inherent in the System. Conflict is one of the main driving factors in a story. As a rule, something has to happen in a story that launches it forward on an adventure. This conflict can come from several different places: nature, God, man, the local post office. It doesn't have to be a Dark Lord returning from death, but you should consider the tone. For example, yelling at your friend for eating the last cookie is a measured response and fits well within a tone. Stabbing your friend over taking the last cookie, however, is Olympian god level of theatrics. To elaborate on various styles of conflict, we're going to take a look at the Odyssey. Besides being a story of a coerced cruise in Gilligan's Island, the Odyssey features various types of conflict, such as man versus nature, man versus divine, man versus man, everyone against Odysseus making it back to Ithaca. We will be looking at the three main types of conflict and breaking down how they work. Cautionary tip: do not overdo the tragedy. The audience will respond with more emotion to a single, well-developed character death than to the carnage of thousands. When you paint a tragedy, such as an entire building of people going up in flames, the audience cannot identify with that response and therefore have a limited emotional reaction to it. Whereas the death of one character can relate more to the death of a loved one or the grieving that a person has already felt. This will put it in a realm of believability and give you a more emotional response to the conflicts that are within your story. First, let's look at man versus nature. Man versus nature displays the centuries of struggle that mankind has dealt with nature, being out in the elements, and fighting for the right of survival and planting crops, livestock being taken. Humanity has depended on nature for decades. However, it has also been at odds with storms, natural disasters, and illness. In reality, the goddess of nature will cover the earth with beautiful forests, at the same time create disease and mosquitoes at the same time. Within the Odyssey, the god that inconveniences Odysseus the most is Poseidon, the god of the sea. Odysseus cannot fight the sea as a man. However, he can adapt, survive it, get with some divine help and ingenuity, he is able to escape the ocean and live. Humans on their own are not able to take nature, which is why man versus nature is such an interesting topic. Humans adapt. These adaptations, like houses, coats, tools, they're the reason that man survives nature. A modern take would be nature reclaiming vengeance for the condition of the planet, taking vengeance on the humans because their adaptations have harmed the planet. Something to keep in mind is that nature has always been essential for humanity. However, humanity has never been essential for nature. Next up is man versus the divine. Man versus the divine became popular within the late 19th through the 20th century. Due to the endless wars, poverty, and starvation that several countries faced, they began to believe that God had forsaken them, or that man is the puppet of a predestined fate. This led to literature spiking in man versus God or man versus fate itself, with a variety of different outcomes. Basically, modern era literature was filled with depressed authors displaying their bleak outlooks on life. However, there are other ways that man versus the divine can be used. Arguably, a worse fate than being pitted against nature is being pitted against the divine. And this sort of conflict can appeal to an audience as it shows what creates humanity. What creates humanity is also a source of conflict. Modern literature claimed it was suffering that created humanity, and without suffering, there was no humanity. whereas philosophers like Kant claimed it was the desire to do good, an innate desire of goodness. Either way you look at it, when your character has their back against the wall, it will effectively display their true colors and motivations better than any character development can. Lastly, man versus man. Man versus man, or humanity versus itself, is not uncommon. Look at every war, conflict, or dispute in history, and it generally involves humanity fighting against each other. Except for one time it was humanity versus emus, but it was Australia. Within the Odyssey, man versus man is depicted when Odysseus' life gets put in danger by the decisions that his crew members made. Also when Odysseus fought against the hordes of suitors that were invading his house. A few different aspects of man versus man are revenge, battles, wars, revolution. Your protagonist may start a revolution after serving a king faithfully for years, or be the leader of a war. Odysseus himself has had several experiences with war. He was in the Trojan War, and that's what made him leave Ithaca in the first place. Well, that and Agamemnon, but that is a story for a different time. So, Odysseus has seen his fair share of human conflict, and he fought with several of his crew members to stay alive when they insisted on doing the one thing that they were told not to do, which was kill the cows of Helios, or Apollo, it depends on who you ask. And they did anyway, and they all died. Keep in mind, when creating these conflicts, that a chosen one does not need to be your main focus. What made the Odyssey special was he was not a chosen hero. In fact, Odysseus was flawed, like all the Greek heroes. Odysseus had anger issues, human impulses. He even made bad decisions, like taunting a Cyclops. Conflict brings out humanity. That might sound backwards, but it's not. The results of conflict bring out humanity, people helping each other. During conflict, it brings out emotions, high emotions, impulse decisions. That's another factor of humanity. Strategic planning, cooperation, another factor of humanity. Odysseus became less like an unshakable general and more human throughout each conflict that he faced. So, when evaluating conflict needed to drive your story, consider the different options you have. Conflict takes on many different shapes and sizes. Just make sure your size matches your response. And consider your genre. If your character reacts to the burning of his village in the same manner as he would the cancellation of his favorite TV show, take a step back and reevaluate. Should this response be more emotional? Should it be less emotional? How does this character respond to stress? Is the tragedy large enough to sympathize with? Is it too large? Remember, the first draft is not supposed to be perfect. That's all for this week. Make sure to check in the description for helpful articles about conflict and interesting articles about strategies from historical wars so you can implement them in your book. And now for your weird writing fact. Did you know that creative writers do not have a dominant brain hemisphere? Yeah, that's right. We do not have a dominant left or right brain hemisphere. It has been found that creative writers bounce back and forth between left and right brains and are equally dominant. Though some sources claim that there is no such thing as right and left brain dominance, since both sides are working together equally. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment for any future themes or tropes you would like covered, and be sure to look at our next episode covering romance, with examples from Othello. If you are familiar with Othello, yes, I did choose that on purpose, and yes, it is for a romance one. If you are not familiar with Othello, stay tuned. It'll be interesting. We will also be giving examples from Pride and Prejudice, with episode 2, Flowers, Chocolates, and Promises They Don't Intend to Keep. This has been your Monday Monologue.